This is TradeFlow News, bringing you relevant news and insights from around the world. TradeFlow News, enabling trade for SMEs and economies worldwide.
These are some of the key topics that we will be looking into in today's program.
First, let's take a look at the overnight headlines which are impacting the commodity markets. U.S. crude oil production slid in April by about 0.5% to its lowest since February, according to a monthly report from the U.S. Energy Information Administration on Friday. Oil production fell to about 11.6 million barrels per day in April from nearly 11.7 million barrels of oil per day the month prior, the report showed. Output, which has been recovering from the impact of the coronavirus pandemic, is still far below its record high of 12.3 million barrels of oil per day in 2019. Production in North Dakota sank 19.3% to about 900,000 barrels of oil per day, its lowest since June 2020, the report showed. That was the biggest month-over-month decline since May 2020.
Oil prices rose about 2% in volatile trade on Friday but were still heading for a weekly decline as investors worried about a potential recession-driven demand downturn even as global fuel supplies remain tight. Central banks around the world are raising interest rates to tame inflation, spurring fears that rising borrowing costs could stifle growth, while mass COVID-19 testing in Shanghai this week caused worries about potential lockdowns that could also hit oil demand. Brent crude futures rose $2.37, or 2.3%, to settle at $107.02 a barrel. U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude rose $2.06, or 2%, to settle at $104.79 a barrel. Both benchmarks traded in negative territory and then rebounded from session lows.
Moving on to the top news in the energy sector.
Oil refining company and labor union representatives pressed the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency at a virtual meeting last week to lower costs of the nation's biofuel blending program when it resets the policy next year, according to sources familiar with the call. The refining industry and unions representing its workers have grown more concerned about the impact of an expected overhaul of the Renewable Fuel Standard, RFS. It requires refiners to blend billions of gallons per year of biofuels like ethanol into the nation's fuel or buy credits called RINs from those that do. When Congress enacted the RFS in 2005, it set yearly volume requirement targets of renewable fuel through 2022 and gave the EPA broad authority to reshape the policy after that. The EPA is expected to propose changes by mid-September.
India's fuel consumption in June rose by 17.9% from a year earlier, government data showed on Friday, as demand in the world's number 3 oil consumer headed back towards pre-pandemic levels. Global oil prices have surged in response to concerns about tight supplies and disruption linked to oil producer Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but Indian consumers have to an extent been sheltered as Indian refiners have bought cheaper Russian fuel the West has shunned. Consumption of fuel, a proxy for oil demand, totaled 18.67 million tons, data from the Indian Oil Ministry's Petroleum Planning and Analysis Cell showed.
Next, we have the top news in metal markets.
Copper prices steadied on Friday as the positive impact of a weaker dollar on industrial metals consumption offset worries about demand in top consumer China. Funds cutting short positions, bets on lower prices, also helped support copper, traders said. Benchmark copper on the London Metal Exchange (LME) was little changed at $7,809 a ton at 16:02 GMT and on course for a fifth consecutive weekly loss. Prices of the metal used in the power and construction industries have dropped nearly 30% from a record high of $10,845 in March.
Gold was on course to fall for a fourth straight week on Friday, hurt by the dollar's ascent and as bets for steep interest rate hikes gained traction after healthy U.S. jobs data. Spot gold was up 0.1% at $1,741.94 per ounce by 2:49 p.m. Eastern Time, 18:49 GMT. Bullion has lost about 3.7% so far this week, which would be its worst since mid-May. U.S. gold futures settled up 0.2% at $1,742.30. Lately, gold has failed to attract safe haven flows despite growing recession risks as investors have instead opted for the dollar, which has marched to fresh two-decade highs. We will now look at the top news in the agricultural sector. European Union wheat is being scooped up at the start of the 2022-23 crop season as importers profit from a pullback in prices from records and seek alternatives to Ukrainian supplies disrupted by war, traders and analysts said. A rare purchase of German wheat this week by Egypt's state grains buyer, which ramped up direct purchases outside international tenders, underscored how EU wheat is being tapped in the Middle East and Africa to cover the early part of the new season that started this month. The EU looks like having to take a big share of the burden of replacing Ukrainian wheat this summer, a trader said.
That is all for today's news on commodity markets. Stay tuned to TradeFlow News as we continue to provide you with more updates. We also invite you to follow us on Twitter at TradeFlow News, which allows you to watch our program on your mobile device or desktop to receive information from there.